So good morning and welcome to today's workshop on managing flexible working post-pandemic. I'm Emily Stubbs, Policy and Projects Manager at the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. And this event is part of our Growth Through People campaign. Growth Through People aims to help local firms boost productivity through improved leadership and people management skills. This year it involves 8 free workshops alongside thought leadership blogs, videos, podcasts and more, all on the GBCC website throughout March. The campaign will end with a virtual conference on the 30th of March, which will feature a mixture of inspirational keynotes, thought-provoking panel discussions, and practical workshops. I'd like to thank all of our headline sponsors for their support, the University of Birmingham's Work Inclusivity Research Centre, Aston University, and BMet College. And I'd also like to give a huge thank you to today's speakers for joining us to share their perspectives and expertise. Before I hand over to Dr Daniel Whealey from the University of Birmingham's Work Inclusivity Research Centre to kick us off and introduce today's speakers, we have 2 anonymous polls that I'd like to ask you to fill out, which might spark some ideas for today's discussions and will crucially feed into our research into leadership and people management across the region. Sophie, are we okay to put the polls up? I'm hoping they're appearing. There we go. So completely anonymous. Do you think your work output has changed in any way during the COVID pandemic? And similarly, has your overall sense of personal resilience increased, decreased, or remained the same over the last 12 months since the advent of the pandemic? While you're doing that, I'll mention it now and at the end of today's session. Please do complete the post-event survey. We'll send it to you after this event, and it would be hugely appreciated if you could spend 5 minutes filling it out. It's not just about event feedback, but much like these polls, it will contribute to our research into leadership and people management in the region and help inform our policy work with local and national stakeholders on this agenda. And of course, inform what Growth Through People looks like going forward. And we hugely appreciate every single response. And join us on social media if you're on Twitter or LinkedIn using the hashtag GTP21, which you'll see in the top right-hand corner of the slides. I hope you enjoyed today's session and take away some valuable ideas to implement in your own business. If you have any technical questions, please do post them in the chat. And if you have any questions for Dr. Dan and the other speakers who will be participating today, please put them in the Q&A. Without further ado, thank you for filling in that poll. And I will now hand over to Dr. Daniel Whealey from the University of Birmingham's Work Inclusivity Research Centre.
Thank you, Emily. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm based at University of Birmingham Business School in the Work Inclusivity Research Centre. I lead a work stream on wellbeing and work, but much of my research focuses on aspects of And I must note, actually, I have a really unstable internet connection this morning, which is one of the things that we're going to debate and discuss, of course, around the benefits or otherwise of remote working at home. But I must note that. So if I occasionally freeze or have problems, I do apologise. This is unusual for me. The focus of today's session is an interesting one. So it's titled Managing Flexibility in the Post-COVID Era. Of course, that itself presents a really interesting set of questions given the learning we've had from the last year. So what we've done is, instead of focusing on a purely academic debate, what we wanted to do today is actually get insights, experiences, and understanding around this from a number of different organisations. So I'm very pleased to say that we've been joined today from representatives from 4 organisations. And we're going to hear from each of them this morning, and then we're going to offer the chance for you throughout the session to pose questions to each of the speakers, and at the end of once everyone has had a chance to speak, we will do a bit of a Q&A session so we can kind of cover those questions and respond to them as best we can. So I would like to just introduce our speakers briefly. And then I'll just give a little bit of a contextual introduction to the session. first of all, I'd like to introduce Tara Tomes, who is the Managing Director of East Village PR Company. We're also joined today by Andy Nabbs, who's the Head of End User Computing at SCC. Paul Birt, who is the Head of HR at Siemens Smart Infrastructure Division, GB&I. And we're also joined today by Michelle Yeoman, who is the COO for UKI COO at Deutsche Bank, and Zoe Whatmore, our colleague who is the Chief of Staff at Deutsche Bank, Birmingham. So I'm very pleased to be joined by our 5 speakers today from 4 organisations. So before we provide them with a chance to speak today, I'd just like to give a bit of context on this discussion around managing flexibility. And of course, the last year has been a really interesting one when we think about the notion, the whole concept of flexibility in work. In March last year, there was a sudden shift, a relatively unexpected shift. I say relatively because perhaps a few of us saw it coming, a relatively unexpected shift of a significant portion of workers to working at home. At its peak, around 2 in 5 working individuals were working at home in some form, either all of the time or for some of their time. And that's pretty consistent picture in many developed economies. So now, why that's interesting when we think about the subject of flexibility is that it actually represented a very unflexible work routine. We were all told we had to work at home. So it's an interesting contextual starting point for us when we think about this journey, this discussion around how we manage flexibility in the post-COVID era. But that's not to say it's not something that's generated a lot of positive discussion and consideration around where the future of work might go. For a long-standing body of evidence has developed around remote working at home that tells us there are a lot of benefits to be had. So as per Emily's question this morning, one of the benefits that's been identified is the potential for productivity benefits. That's both from the removal of time that would be otherwise spent in other activities, like commuting time that would be lost, but also from the ability the process of working at home offers a number of other benefits in terms of potential for work-life balance management, over their working lives. However, there are a number of challenges that people face when working at home. And some of those we've seen in the last year are specific and particular to the experience of the last year, and perhaps are not so relevant for our discussion going forward. Things like having to deal with homeschooling, for example, is a good one, which we would imagine would be less of a concern in the future. However, some of the other well-documented long-standing outcomes of working at home are things we need to deal with. Things like, for example, how we manage relationships when working remotely. Things like how we identify and nurture talent when we're all working remotely, or at least working remotely most of the time. How we combine remote work with other forms of work. Now, that might be because of organizational need, where you have workers in different types of occupations, different types of functions, some needing to be at a co-located workspace, others able to work at home. Or it might be a management of workers who are working remotely some of the time and working at a co-located space at other times, as we sometimes call a hybrid work mode. So there are things we need to think about. How do we promote collaboration among workers? How do we get the best out of teams? How do we manage teams? Thinking about the topic of this session this morning. Those are all really important questions to ask. And linked to that, then we return to the question that was on Emily's poll at the start about productivity. Well, what does that all mean for productivity in the longer term? We may have seen increases in productivity in the last year as people have moved to work at home, benefiting from some of the things we already mentioned, removal of the commute, etc. But are those productivity benefits likely to be realised in the longer term? Those are questions that we want to try and respond to. And then I think the last thing I wanted to cover as a bit of context is in terms of, well, what have people's experiences been in the last year, and how do those experiences inform what we feel about the preferences of workers and the preferences of organisations moving forward in regard to flexibility? Well, what the evidence base is definitely indicating is that on the worker side, there is an appetite for continued use of remote working at least some of the time. So a number of different data captures have identified that, from understanding society data to data collected by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, and indeed research that was conducted in the Work Inclusivity Research Centre by a couple of my colleagues, Holly Birkett and Sarah Forbes, with other colleagues at a couple of other universities, who also found a similar pattern of workers indicating this continued preference to work at home, at least some of the time. And what do organisations feel about this? Well, we've certainly seen a number of large organisations coming out and suggesting that they see the future of work as being one that they describe as being flexible. And I guess that is where I'll launch into our panel members' individual experiences and reflections on the last year, is to ask, well, what do we think about this notion of managing flexibility in the future of work? What that discussion? I'm gonna stop talking because my internet connection is up and down like the proverbial yo-yo this morning. So I'm going to take a back seat now, and this, of course, is one of the other challenges of working at home remotely, is that when your internet connection does go down, the world feels like it's falling down around you. So I would like, without further ado, to hand over to Tara Tomes, who'll offer her insights and reflections on the last year.
Morning, thanks everyone. As Dan said, I'm Tara. I run a PR agency called East Village. It's been quite 12 months, hasn't it? So perfect segue, I guess, in terms of how we've dealt with flexible working. Now, I guess my first caveat here is we're a small team, so that ability to be agile and to be more flexible is easier operationally. So I start with that point. As a business, you know, when I set up East Village kind of over 7 years ago, I always wanted it to be centred around a team and team culture. And anyone that has heard me speak before or sees some of the things that I write, I talk about, that's more than just, you know, wearing trainers to the office and Friday drinks. You know, for me, team culture is about, how does that team feel? Are they happy? Are they healthy? How do they perform? So that has always sat at the heart of East Village. A couple of years ago, you know, I've always been a boss that's like, cool, if you got to wait in for an ASOS order and come in 20 minutes late, that's fine, as long as you get your job done. So we have a very open culture in that way anyway. So I think that's why the last 12 months have potentially been slightly less challenging for us on that side. A couple of years ago, we officially introduced more flexible working, which really at that point was just flexi hours. And that was as a result of one of the team came back. She was the first person to go off and have a baby. She came back to the business, and it was just a really informal discussion. And that is where I think a lot of this can stem from. As Dan said, we've been forced into this point around working from home, but actually now moving forward, how do those informal discussions with colleagues help shape the way that you manage a team and grow a team and build the way that it works? That's really, really crucial to me. So we introduced these flexi hours when one of our team members came back from maternity leave. I'm really of the mind, you know, our business should work for the people's lives that work for us. You know, they shouldn't have to completely fit into the business. But that said, I also don't think there should be any discrimination, even if positive. So that was a choice that the team was able to have across the team, whether they had children or not. And I think that's a really important point as well. For people making decisions about what happens post-COVID, you have to be really conscious. Yes, we are all now so much more respectful of parents and understanding their struggle. You know, for years, parents have told us, I'm struggling with this because I've got to go and pick up a sick child from school, or we're managing childcare. But now we've all really seen that in the public domain. But how do you also keep that fair balance for a team that doesn't all have children? How do you make sure now that it doesn't just feel like parents who get those working from home or flexi benefits? So that is something I think is really crucial. So last year, obviously, we were all forced to work from home. We actually started working from home the week before lockdown started. Now, prior to that, I was the only member of the team who actually really liked working from home. I found it was more productive. I was just much happier doing that. I love the team environment, I love being there, but working from home really worked for me. I've got a really young team, so they were really apprehensive about what it meant. Actually, you know, it was super easy operationally. We all work on laptops anyway. We have things like Slack and Zoom. That bit was super simple for us as a business, but it was them adapting to not feeling that office environment. You know, we're a very close team. It's a really fun environment. How do you make sure that, especially in those early stages where people were working, you know, on their ironing boards in 1-bedroom flats and all of those sorts of things, how do you suddenly make sure that they feel like they have a good working environment? And that is something I think is really going to come through as those restrictions lift. You know, it was okay that everyone just worked from home and no one really asked any questions about, well, what was their setup? You know, is it good for their overall health? We now have to refocus in on that. And if you are offering that as a benefit, you've got to put some time into somebody going into their workspace and checking they have everything that they need. That's really crucial. So that is something to be really mindful of. But I do think we have a real opportunity to do things differently. So last year, obviously, we paid, like everyone else, for an office on Colmore Road to just sit empty for 6 months. You know, we lost 50% of our revenue in that first week of lockdown. And then I refused to kind of give in. I had one day where I was like, okay, I'm a bit done. But I refused to give in. I didn't put anyone on furlough. We didn't have any government support. We just ploughed on. And actually, we've had some of probably the most successful 12-month period we've ever had in our kind of 7 years. But there was a decision that had to be made around our office. Our lease was coming up in September. So again, it was a conversation with the team. All of a sudden, everyone really just felt happier. Definitely, you know, Dan talked about removing that commute, and there was something in that. No one realised they didn't love the commute, me included, really. And I've worked in London as well, so, you know, I understand the kind of slog of the commute. No one realised the drag that has and the monotony of that. So suddenly people were happier and healthier, even though we were in a pandemic. Yes, lockdown does factor into that, you know. Outside of the lockdowns, we've been able to work together once, twice a week. We've worked in coffee shops. A couple of the team did Couch to 5K together. Me and a couple of the other girls did weekly exercise classes together. So we still had those social interactions. And when we decided to give up the office last summer, it was a collective decision. And I made it really clear that this was about the short term. You know, I got a lot of stick for giving up the office, predominantly from corporates on Cornwall Road who said it's businesses like you that will be the death of city centres. Well, there are a couple of things there. This is not the death of the office. It's actually a really exciting future for what working looks like. You know, we never before would have considered having a member of the team who lived elsewhere in the country, whereas now we are all on Zoom all of the time. And whilst we do get that Zoom fatigue, it's just opened up those possibilities. Likewise, you know, we never would have done pitches for clients that wasn't in person. Now, this acceleration of digital is just a given. So I think we have a massive opportunity to look at how we work. It's not about no one will ever go into an office ever again. But for me, the ability to work flexibly, and you have to look at what flexible means to you and your organisation. That is the most important thing. The rhetoric here is not cool young agencies like East Village are the future because they've given up the office. No, it's just we have an ability to move our workforce in a different way, and we're going to do that, especially in the short term. You know, there was a commercial decision around not paying for an empty office on Colmore Road for 6 months plus. You know, we'd already done that, and actually since then I then reinvested that money, and now we have an unlimited training budget and people got pay rises. So I think there definitely is a communication level as well with the team when you make some of these important decisions, that actually I made a decision, we made it together, and I took that step, and it was something that collectively benefited everybody. But equally, as restrictions lift and we come out of things, if they want an office environment again, now I think we just look at something different. Is it a permanent office space? Do we have more hot desks? You know, I don't want that rigorous Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, everyone feels like they have to be in an office. But I think where people get a bit confused, they think that this working from home environment, this embracing flexible working, is the death of the office, and you know, you're forcing people to work in isolation. Well, no, that's what lockdown is. That's not what flexible working means. You know, I want us in the future to have team members, I don't know, like in Dubai on holiday, but in a team meeting, or yes, looking after their kids, but feeling like no one's judging them whilst they're on a team meeting on Zoom, and a couple of people in an office together. You know, we're a communications agency, so looking at the world around us and understanding what is happening in the hearts and minds of people is really key. And I've always said that to the team. You know, any other small business owner will absolutely feel me when they're like, I don't actually sit at my desk ever. In normal life, you are running around here, there and everywhere. And I've always tried to get across to the team, go out there, experience, or just go and work in the coffee shop over the road, just so you're out of the four walls. But I think there was always that pressure that you had to be in an office because that's what had always been done. So now I think we have a great opportunity for people to not feel that pressure. You still have to do your job, but there's a different environment that equally is not your house, because that's the problem. We're in a strange point now where we're being forced to be in our homes. Flexible working does not mean solely working from home. It means embracing change and allowing your team to feel like they have that flexibility. And for me, that is so key. And that does link, we are an all-female team. Another point of diversity I am currently working on. But actually, as an all-female team, I don't want, and I wouldn't for any men that come in, I don't want anyone to be in my business and feel like they have to choose between a family and a career, because in my personal opinion, you can have both. So I want to build a business. You know, I talk about building this kind of workforce for the future. That's really important to me. And that's not about looking like a cool agency. It's about building a business that works just as hard for the people that work for it. So you don't have to choose between family and career. You can have both. And a business that embraces that, I personally think, is going to flourish, but is also going to have real loyalty from the team, because they know you're in it just as much as they are. And almost like I talked about before around, you know, the ability to have conference calls abroad or go for clients you wouldn't otherwise. We've got a huge opportunity with this to attract much more diverse workforces, without a doubt. There are people who are being missed by every industry for millions of reasons. And for me, you know, PR is a it's female-led, brilliant, tick, I'm very happy with that. But it's like 98% white, 89% British. Like, we are missing huge swathes of incredible and creative people because we're not going out to them. We're not promoting what our industry does. And I just think we have a brilliant opportunity now for businesses to attract more diverse workforces, to be more welcoming, to be more inclusive. You know, part-time carers, people with other responsibilities who thought that the 9 to 5 was not for them. Actually, it can be, but in a really different way. And it doesn't have to be a Monday to Friday. I think that is a huge opportunity for me. And I think, you know, I am someone who I love change. I see change as a bit of an adventure. So I get that optimism probably makes this whole thing a lot easier for me. But I have seen so many businesses in those periods between lockdowns force their teams back because they had an office and it had to be used. That for me is unbelievable. In everything we should have learned from this past 12 months, you should be understanding what's your office space for. For me, absolutely is about creativity and that collaboration piece. But now think about how you manage. How do you manage your team? How do you spot that someone looks down on a team Zoom call? What does that look like? You know, for us, we have Happy and Healthy, which is our it's kind of our mental health policy. You know, we do a lot around mental health, kind of short touch points, but also more structured support. That goes into everyone's 3-month reviews anyway. So just make sure you've got people in the team who are buddies with each other, and we've got a head of happiness, and it might be little gifts in the post. It might be bringing people together. It's having a one-to-one call. Those water cooler moments can still happen. I think when you've got a younger workforce, it does also help. But for me, the technology is there for us to 100% embrace a new future. It is not one thing or the other. This for me is an evolution of how we work, and that is absolutely how I see it.
Thanks, Tara. That's brilliant, and thanks for those insights. I think there's a lot of discussion points there that we can come back to at the end, so that's brilliant, and thanks for your contribution there. So if I can now hand over to Andy Nabbs, please.
I'm just in awe to start with, Tara, because you did the whole of that without breathing. Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Nabbs, and I work for SCC, a mid-tier IT company, mid-tier SI company based out of Tyseley in Birmingham, who invested heavily with a strong heritage in the Midlands, with over 2,000 people in our campus area. What I'd like to talk about today is kind of cautious confidence. Now, what do I mean by cautious confidence? About 12 months ago, I did a similar session for the Chamber of Commerce where we looked at emergency ways of working from home at the start of the COVID crisis. And I think, to echo some of Tara's kind of sentiments, a lot of what she said I've got in my discussion points this morning. But, you know, it's been a long time since this pandemic started, 51 weeks, 1 day, 8 hours, 30 minutes if you're counting. Well, I was, to make sure that, you know, we had something that worked to actually get us over the line. What we've witnessed is a massive shift, though, in business culture, from being tied to that office or on the road traveling to customers for those face-to-face meetings, to a kind of a shift right, full kind of convergent digital economy, all in the space of 12 months. We're seeing people's shyness disappear. Because let's face it, before the pandemic, who would have thought that everybody would have been on video conferencing? People were shy. They didn't want to see the face on a screen. They'd rather IM somebody or talk to somebody on a phone. I mean, IT managers have had to adopt to change rapidly, bringing together disparate networks, creating secure remote platforms for work. And it's in these kind of areas that we see a lot of insights. I think when I did the presentation a year ago, I came up with some stats that we'd recently commissioned around the modern workplace, which are quite interesting. And I'd like to kind of just revisit those, just to look at what we said a year and a bit ago to what they actually mean now. We looked at 67% of people said they can't work from home because their organizations restrict home working. IT managers said that they calculated 10% of their workforce would have the ability to work remotely, while 90% would be tied to an office. I think we've probably seen that whole thing flip now, and it's more like 90% working remote, 10% stuck in the office. So what's changed? Is it the businesses now looking at different ways to work? I think it's more about the policies and the processes that we've had to pull into place. And a lot of what we've seen is top down. And I'll be interested to see what Paul says a bit later about how HR have actually handled this top-down mentality. So as we come out of this pandemic, I mean, I've termed this phrase cautious confidence as a way of effecting change, and not more of a pat on the back for those IT directors that had a disaster recovery policy that they thought had worked in the event of this pandemic. Because let's face it, all they did was actually turn the taps on products very quickly to enable people. Now what they're having to do is reflect, go back and start looking at that and start to rebuild those platforms from scratch, because the foundations weren't there, the governance, the security wasn't there. But what we've actually seen is that massive shift where IT companies are thinking, and actually, we can help you change the way you do work. If you look at what Microsoft have recently said, they've announced a massive initial growth in their Teams platform since this time last year, and I wonder why. I mean, if you look at that and Zoom, I think they've now got over 117 million users of their product. Great for Microsoft, but obviously what they've done is allowed people like Microsoft to accelerate the way they're changing work. Let's face it, we are trend followers. We follow the way that the IT companies bring products out. And only recently, they brought out in the last 3 weeks a product called Viva. Now, Viva is based on the Teams platform. It's more around the customer experience and employee well-being. So there's a lot of things they're doing that they've learned through the pandemic that they've accelerated in their own product launches, which is going to help people change. I think my colleagues at SEC would probably agree with me. They've spent the initial 3 months from March onwards deploying things like Teams, Zoom, and displacing old products and instant messaging and telephony, but more influencing things like video conferencing and rooms as a service is where we're going to see things going. Everything is as a service and commoditized. We're also seeing things like Teams from Microsoft becoming a platform, not software, but a platform of choice for moving forward. And we see people now developing their telephony to link in with their video conferencing equipment. They're looking at the ways they can link in their applications to this platform, which means you then have a standard way of collaborating that people have now suddenly got used to and can continue to use as we move forward. I would like to bring probably the conversation back to other areas that we all forget about when working from home. And again, back to Tara's comments about the isolation of working on your own and the issues and the complexities that this has. And at least, you know, looking at things like your well-being. I'm sorry to bring up things like Microsoft again, but they were an exemplar during this period. And what they actually did is turn around to all of their employees and said, right, you have 2 hours in the week where you just turn everything off. I want you to just go away from your desk, go away from your work, go for a walk, just think about things, and then come back and start again. And what they were doing was trying to bring out that kind of well-being. And again, Tara, I think you echoed this, and I've seen this on social media. Companies have been sending out wellness boxes. There might be food boxes, there might be things they do online together, but it's more about that engaged employee relationship. I mean, putting people first is now a common theme amongst employees. And a recent survey I saw from Gallup said that 21% of organizations that engage with their employees and offer them a well-being service get a highly motivated and profitable employee base. PwC stated that 84% of companies had a new digital-based training program to boost employee recognition and status, which helped benefit from staff retention and better feedback. So, you know, we're now in this changed world. We probably won't go back to the way we were. Many companies are now preparing for June the 21st with big parties as we now return to normal life and possibly the new normal way of work. And some companies are now looking at these milestones as a point of change. So bringing in new practices and procedures. We're already in that kind of seeing that explosion of things like automation and artificial intelligence with machine learning break into things over the last 2 to 3 years. That has been accelerated heavily over the last 12 months. And it's not dangerous because it's not going to reduce the impact on people working. It's there to augment what they're doing. And what we're seeing is we're now in that paradigm of the apps revolution, where we'll see some of the rise of in-house kind of power application development and the automation to streamline the ways we work. So what I and my colleagues see, and we've engaged with more and more with customers, are the trends, and I think I've probably got 6 trends I want to talk about very quickly. I think we need to reimagine teamwork, and we change the culture of the way businesses are. And if you reach out to your employees and ask them the basic question, going back to the ways that we were working before or move to a fully remote working, I think you hit it on the head earlier, we'll end up with that hybrid mix. The more I talk to employees of businesses and leadership teams, many still miss that social interaction of being in the office. As we said, the water cooler effect. Although you can IM someone, there is no real replacement for a casual discussion with your colleagues around the office, because you get more done. Second one is that kind of time versus culture. And again, we're not now kind of tied into that Monday 9 to 5, 37.5-hour week. And what we want to see is where the Gen Z users, you know, these new workers coming in, they want the flexibility to work when they can, or when they can, or when they want to do things. And we've seen that a lot more with these people homeschooling, where they've had to log off for 3 hours, but they've put the kids to bed after dinner and come back online, and they found themselves more productive and engaged because they're allowed to do things at their own pace. Again, this comes back to culture, but primarily it comes back to, and this is going to be one for Paul a bit later, the trust element. I mean, how do you know that your employees are working? Can you gauge productivity for a remote worker? Other than checking, are they logged on? Are they doing this? Are they on their email? That is big brother mentality. We've got to get away from that and become more trustworthy around this flexible approach. Looking after mental health of employees and well-being wasn't a headline agenda before the pandemic. But, you know, it's been brought more into focus. And what I see is HR now need to possibly change their approach to looking after employees. It'd be interesting again to hear what Paul says about that one. I experienced that 7 years ago, and I'll come into that a bit later when I worked for British Telecom. But I did mention earlier on about learning platforms and empowering users to better themselves. A lot of what we've seen is that customers have opened up these learning platforms. Why? To give people something to do in the pandemic where they're locked down and have nothing to focus on, but also to better themselves. And if you look at LinkedIn, the amount of people that have popped up with a badge for this, a badge for that, I've got trained in this. It's been great to see people develop their own interests and take away probably a change in their career as we move forward. I mean, the recruitment market since January has become very, very buoyant. And we need to do a lot more now to retain that talent inside our organizations. So how do you go about retaining that talent? Again, you offer a lot more flexibility in training, investment in people, and a lot more things you can do. I think one of my old HR colleagues stated it costs 3 times as much to entice a new person to your company that it does to retain them. So why aren't we doing a lot more about that? Why aren't we developing these things from that level? When you have these highly trained individuals and you start to get them to work, you start to look at the amount of data these people are creating. Analyzing that data, not just from a pure business perspective, but from a well-being perspective, also helps you understand, are you doing the right things for your employees moving forward? Understanding the way that data is stored is a great one. So as we move from that kind of on-premise, and I call this kind of the green revolution, we see a lot of people moving their infrastructures from their old twinkly light data centers up into the cloud. The whole digital economy has started heavily and has rapidly been accelerating in the last 12 months as we've seen people move from that static base up into the cloud. And we're now in that consumption-based market. As part of that consumption-based market, we see a lot more going back to this kind of Gen Z thing. Gen Z being the next generation of people. They're coming out of school and university as self-coders. They've been taught how to use systems better. And what we're going to see is a lot more of these employees create applications and better themselves. And I want to hark to a presentation I saw in 2019, where I saw a young fitter from Autoglass develop an application on a Microsoft platform that negated the need for 5 manual forms that he then had to take home and fill in. And when he actually rolled it out inside the business, it saved Autoglass 1.2 million in that first year. I hasten to say that guy now is an IT person. He heads up a team of young developers building the next generation of IT, building the way we change and develop applications and the way we move forward, which is great. I want to quickly go back 12 years ago, just if I can, and look at the way my own career was affected by home working. I worked for British Telecom at that point where they decided that 60% of their office space wanted to be shut down. They wanted to get rid of it overnight. Why? To save operational costs. So suddenly we're all ended up with, here's your work from home contract. Well, yes, we had, wasn't called broadband then, it was called connectivity. Yes, we all had ISDN, but now was broadband given to us as free. We were given an allowance to set up your home office, to get your desk, get your chair, make sure everything was health and safety ready. And then we started to look at the ways we could work and interact. This was before the days of massive collaboration tools, you know, and we did miss that water cooler effect. So you ran into the office once a week, anywhere you could find a desk just to meet up with people. Nowadays, you don't need to. And what I'm saying is that a lot of what we're going to see and we're going to see in change is going to be driven by this need to work from home, that flexible hybrid work from home, but the ability to claw that back. I know the government keep giving you money for things, but a lot of people weren't aware you could claim back a lot of your tax code allowance for working from home for the last 12 months. I was only told about this just before the tax return time, which is great. But it means that you can start to gain benefits from working home, not directly from your employee, but from the taxman as well. So business is expected a lot more now, and we've seen a lot more around the conference call approach where possible, replacing face-to-face meetings. And I think my customers have got used to the fact that I don't need to travel 4 hours for a 22-minute meeting. And I think the modern workplace has shifted. So just to kind of summarize what I wanted to say, I'm a firm advocate for change. And I think the term cautious confidence is the way I can see the IT industry moving out. So employees, you need to ensure that you're looking at their needs. Retaining key staff will be a benefit if you have a flexible working policy. Technology will move forward with you to actually help boost productivity and help you with that flexible working. But you need to plan for the future, plan to innovate and drive adoption, invest heavily at this time, and work with the correct partner. SEC, we're here to help you. So thanks for that. I'm now going to pass back to Dan.
Thanks, Andy. That's excellent. And I particularly enjoyed that you actually posed some questions for our next speaker, which is great. So we can make a beeline straight in. If I can introduce Paul Birt from Siemens, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, so I'm Paul from Siemens, head of HR for our Smart Infrastructure division. I could probably use up all my slot this morning just answering Andy's questions that he posed to me, but hopefully if he bears with me, and maybe some of it will come out in what I want to say, and if not, maybe we can pick some up in the Q&As. So what am I going to cover in the next few minutes? I want to share a bit about Siemens in the UK's approach to flexible working pre the COVID outbreak, because we've been doing a lot over many years, as you can imagine. I'm also going to talk about how COVID created this natural acceleration to remote working, which colleagues have already talked about, and share some initial reflections on working from home challenges and what we've done and so on. There's also been a new Siemens global philosophy that was developed during the year of, the last year of COVID. So I'll give you a little bit of a flavour of that, and also sort of bring you straight up to speed with what we're facing at the moment, and how COVID is continuing to shape what we consider new normal, or whatever that might be, whatever it turns into. And Dan and Andy have both mentioned hybrid models for flexible working, and clearly one size doesn't fit all, and so that is something that I think we ought to be considering. So what was Siemens UK's approach to flexible working pre-COVID? Well, strategically, we'd already recognised the need to develop more flexible solutions. And as Tara had said, it's about creating a culture where people felt more in control of their own working arrangements. And this was back in 2018. And we wanted to create something that would reach out to more diverse groups and to promote a more inclusive working environment. Again, both Tara and Andy have talked about, that inclusive working environment. Dan was asking, how we deal with, or Andy was asking how we deal with the sort of top-down approach. And we've been experimenting over a number of years with discovery workshops, and we now run them on a regular basis on various topics. And so these are very much bottom-up exploration of people's views. We identified, unsurprisingly, that our part-time community was focused around female workers, as an example. And we developed an initiative that we called Employee-Led Flexibility, or ELF for short. And I do remember dressing up as an elf to promote it, which was pretty sad. In its simplest form, employees would have better conversations with their managers, placing more onus on the company to accommodate new ways of working. And that was new ways that would better suit employees and their individual circumstances. So from 2019 into early 2020, we were already running successful pilots around the UK. And then, of course, hit us in March 2020. Country was thrust into lockdown, and our total flexible working became a reality as everywhere else. And it meant that, and we did have skeptical managers who were procrastinating over ELF, and they suddenly found themselves having to deal with this new way of working. And as colleagues have said, dealing with team members working from home meant a whole new way of engaging, not least from a health and safety perspective, with all the issues around display screen equipment checks and general physical facilities in people's homes. And again, in the future, that is something that we're probably going to need to address in even more, give it even more attention. Under the current regulations, we are in what's called a temporary situation with regards at-home working. That won't stay that way for much longer. I think somebody mentioned one of the biggest challenges has been maintaining mental well-being with many individuals, and especially those living alone, finding the lack of office and workplace social engagement, the water coolers, they've been finding that a real problem. And as I said, during the year, Siemens globally was changing as well. With these regional workshops around new normal, we used ideation techniques and tools, which again, Andy's probably familiar with, just to ensure as many employees as possible were involved in the future plans for a return to work. The idea of remote or mobile working policies became the norm, and it started to take shape. Our new CEO, Roland Bush, who's head of Siemens globally, he made it clear that we would not be returning to the old way. And we started to think about a model based around an average of 2/3 of your time working remotely or mobile. And Tara, I think you talked about it's not just working from home, and that is absolutely spot on. It's about working in a way that best suits your own situation. And I'd love to think that means working in Dubai a few weeks of the year, but obviously we need to work through those challenges. So yeah, the global philosophy is now 2/3 of your time should be working remotely, and only 1/3 in offices or other working spaces. But I did notice the other day that not all global organizations think that. Goldman Sachs suggested that home working is, and I think I'm quoting, an aberration, was what was said, but maybe we can talk about that later. Ongoing challenges: not everyone likes working from home. It's that simple. Not everyone has the luxury of an office or a spare room to be given over to the company's use. And that's not even, considering any additional costs that may be incurred by doing so. Parents and carers are definitely going to be, most likely be worse off. Separating those roles from work is proving to be increasingly difficult and clearly in some cases impossible. And then there's the unintended consequences of exacerbating a two-tier workforce, with those roles that can clearly work remotely, seemingly benefiting from choice, Those that cannot, such as factory workers and service engineers, etc., having to miss out on this new norm. But I think Andy said it, and we're definitely on the same page in Siemens. With the support of technology, roles are continuing to change. What might once have been seen as impossible to work remotely is now becoming not only possible, but commonplace. And things like equipment maintenance and servicing is more and more being done on remote diagnostics and remotely. There's some really exciting new augmented reality solutions that are going to allow senior commissioning engineers, for example, to be virtually present while they're supporting a technician on multiple sites on the same day. And switching to more automation, as Andy has said, in our factories, with much more robotics and robotic programming and coding for machinery that's able to be worked on remotely. That even means that factory and manufacturing roles are going to change going forward as well. But I think this is where the hybrid models are critical. And personally, I think, we need more societal and governmental acceptance that the new normal or future of work is going to, require new approaches. And recently, again, whilst I'm sure it was with the best intentions, I'm not in agreement with our Prime Minister who thinks that home working or flexible working will disappear overnight, post-COVID. Nor, as I said earlier, am I a particular fan of David Solomon, the CEO of Goldman Sachs' view that home working is an aberration. As with most things in life, what's needed is a healthy balance where companies work towards providing their employees with an environment that offers options. Options on flexible working are much more likely to reap benefits in productivity and general employee morale. And so in summary, maybe moving on to some questions later, but so what's needed in my view? Well, I think there's three key things, and they've been touched on, but just I'd like to reinforce them. Develop resilience. Mental and physical well-being, requires ongoing support. And whilst I'm not so sure that HR is there to look after employees, Andy, we're definitely there to help create those conditions where the organisation supports individuals in developing resilience. The other one, encourage relevance. Use the post-pandemic culture shift to work harder at remaining relevant in the fast-moving world of work. And what goes along with that is, embrace continuous learning because, things are definitely not going to slow down. And what I would say is increase this idea of employee-led flexibility, empower more freedom to operate, and then trust employees to remain productive. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what the questions are later on. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul. That's excellent, and some some different insights and some insights that are built on some of the others that we've heard today. So that's excellent. I think what we're identifying is a number of kind of linked and consistent themes in the experiences so far. So if I can hand over to our four representatives from our fourth organisation, Zoe Whatmore and Michelle Yeoman from Deutsche Bank. Are you guys tag teaming it? Is that how we're going to? Yeah. So
that's right. So I'm going to kick off, Dan, and then I'll hand to Michelle. So maybe if I just give people a bit of background to Deutsche Bank. So global organisation, over 80,000 employees, over 8,000 of those in the UK, and about 1,200 of those in the office in Birmingham. And I'm sort of responsible for that group in Birmingham. As a banking organisation, highly regulated industry, and predominantly we were a work from office organisation before the pandemic. Flexible working arrangements were in place, but they were very formal, so less probably flexible, more you agree a different working pattern or working location. Very formal, and then fully documented and agreed in advance. But they did exist, but they were the exception rather than the rule. And literally overnight, we went from probably 98% of people working from the office to a more than 95% of people working from home. And actually, technology-wise, we rose to that challenge pretty well within Deutsche Bank. But it was completely new. And, you know, as Paul alluded to, we have quite a few skeptical managers in terms of the, you know, how productivity would fare with people not being visible outside their offices. And actually, we found productivity in a lot of areas increased as a result of people working from home and having that level of flexibility. We've seen peaks and troughs in that as we've gone through the various lockdowns and, you know, individuals' circumstances at home with homeschooling, caring, whatever they need to do as sort of meant that they've had to change their routines. But what I think we have found is, you know, managers have had to think differently about how they manage staff, how they communicate with staff, how they allow their, you know, their staff to work. I think people's views of, you know, we've surveyed people as we've gone through the year, and we're now looking at our future of work and how we want to use our office space going forward. And we had, you know, very much a flip of people's views from pre-pandemic of, you know, working from the office was people's main preference, to now very much people want that hybrid of sometime working from the office, sometime working from home. And off the back of that, as a company, you know, we're embracing that and saying, right, what's that going to look like? You know, and I think there's so many things to consider in that. If you're going to embrace that hybrid model as a permanent solution for your business, you know, all the things you need to consider, from tech, from the cultural aspects, from how you manage people differently, you know, talent management, recruitment. One thing that's happened in Birmingham, which has been great for us through the lockdown, we've taken on over 150 new starters in the Birmingham office of Deutsche Bank through this pandemic. So we've got over 150 people who now work for our organisation who've never been to the office. We've had to think differently about how do you onboard those people, how do you sort of try and embed them into your business, how do you train them, how do you teach them. We've done that, but actually now some of the feedback is one of the things that body of individuals are struggling with is making the connections with people. You know, those water cooler moments are so important for people that are new to an organisation to sort of get underneath the skin of the organisation, wrap their arms around it and really understand, you know, the culture, how they fit in, you know, what's the overall nature of the office. And I think particularly in bigger organisations, that's quite difficult when you're physically present in the office to get your head round. When you're one step removed, that is more difficult. So we're very conscious of that, and I think certainly for the go forward, we definitely are not proponents for full working from home model. That just wouldn't work. And I think some of the things that we've lost through not being in the office around, you know, connectivity of individuals, the community feel across that 1,200 plus people, the creativity, the spontaneity elements, some of those things now, a year on, you're missing those, and that's the thing that we're conscious of and want to make sure that we can rebuild by having some time in the office. I think as a business, one of the things we need to think about is we've got this presence in the city of Birmingham, and quite a big one. And I think there's an element of civic responsibility in terms of being a part of that wider Birmingham business community and the businesses that we support by having a presence in the city centre. So I think as a business, you know, we have a business need to have it for our people, but we also have a need to have it from the wider Birmingham community aspect as well, and supporting that community in Birmingham. Another element is thinking about how we then use that space. So at the moment, it's very much, you know, lots of desks in a space with some meeting rooms, you know, quite a traditional office setup. I think it's acknowledged that we might want to use that space a bit differently when we get back in. So more creative space, more collaboration space. So those are some of the things, again, we're considering in terms of future of work and how we move forward. One thing I would say is, as a regulated industry, we have been worked very closely with our regulator, and they have a very keen interest on who is in the office and who is not in the office. So we do have some people in the office, a very small number for Birmingham, a greater number for London, but it's very much agreed in tandem with our regulator. There's certain roles that have to be done from within an office environment because of, you know, that regulatory environment or the technical setup that needs to exist for those roles to happen. But we've also been very conscious that we have individuals whose choice it is to be in the office. They have a need to be in the office for a very different reason, not because of their role, but because of their circumstances or because of their health, etc. So we've worked very closely with individuals, and I think that's where the management of people element comes in. Probably with that, I'm going to just hand over to Michelle, and she'll maybe talk about some of the softer elements. So Michelle, over to you.
Yes, no, thank you. So yeah, so I just wanted to add some of the additional aspects that we've been doing from a people perspective. So I think definitely since the beginning, sort of March from last year, you know, once we all was then working from home predominantly, we were then sort of trying to make sure that we were looking after our staff. You know, it's new for all of us in terms of remotely. So we definitely increased the communication, you know, whether that was in all different sort of mediums, whether that was podcasts or sort of emails, people sort of management directly reaching out to their teams. But I think increased communication definitely helped in terms of just encouraging people to still make those connections with each other. We've had to sort of think about, managers have had to sort of adopt and adapt to think about being more flexible and sympathetic as well, to thinking about their sort of teams and how they're coping with the family, looking after family members, and obviously the different strains on for the parents, and sort of managing workloads with the children at school and going through their homework. You know, everyone's been different, and I think that was another aspect, is recognizing that everyone's in a different scenario. And so I think team managers have had to think about, you know, what are the different needs of my different team members, because everyone's individual, everyone has different concerns, and some people have been coping very, very well, and some people have not. So it's making sure that we reach out to the people that potentially are home alone, as well as thinking about the different stages of individuals' resilience as well. We've also sort of been reminding people about what we do have available in terms of health and safety. We have in place mental health first aiders. We've been really focusing on that and increase the presence as well. And so again, the communications have been focused around how can we help you? This is what is available, and trying to obviously think about the different tools and techniques that we have in terms of, you know, looking after yourself at home, when we were allowed to go out, promoting that people should get away from their desk, take a walk at lunchtime or in their normal commute time. So thinking about people's physical and mental well-being, and sort of promoting that, and saying that it's okay to do that. You don't have to be tied at your desk for 8+ hours or whatever it might be. We also, like everybody, we try to embrace the fun element, and I'm sure everyone's went through the quiz phase, but we also did focus on the social elements and engagements as well, trying out virtually the engagements with them, leaders and quizzes. We also had a virtual drag queen disco yoga, so trying all sorts of different things. I think one of our biggest success was we actually did a virtual race across the COO organisation anyway, which was looking at everyone had to sort of record their kilometres each day over a month period. They could run, they could walk, they could cycle, they could row. Not out in the gym, but if they had personal equipment, and across the different the offices across the UKI, so from London to Birmingham to Dublin, to see how far people go. So yes, it's been really interesting listening to how other organisations have been coping, and there's definitely some similarities. And I think, I would just like to just to close on the fact that we are looking to moving forward with a different future of work model, and it'd be really interesting to listen to other people's views and opinions on what they're doing, because we'd like to continue to think differently and embrace the flexibility, but whilst also remaining inclusive. So I'll hand back over to Dan.
Thank you, Zoe and Michelle. That's brilliant. Yeah, and thank you to all the panelists again for your contributions today. So if I can now open it up to any questions that anyone may have in our audience today. I'm going to actually start off with a couple of questions that I'd prepared for the benefit of being a chair in one of these kind of things, is that you can take the opportunity to ask these types of questions that you want to ask people and perhaps don't always have the opportunity to. So I'll start off actually with one that's perhaps slightly, in a way, maybe it's playing a bit of devil's advocate with the idea of a hybrid work model where we return to some degree to a physical workplace separate from the home, combined with home working, which is how do we think that we can effectively manage that? So I think one of the things that perhaps, if we're all thinking along the same lines here today, is that what we would probably be concerned about is the potential for a kind of snapback outcome, where everything very quickly reverts to exactly the previous model it was, under the pressure primarily of peers. So if everyone starts going back to the office and getting in early, and thinking about an office environment as an example, and getting in early and getting their desk and getting kind of staking ownership over a space, kind of territoriality creeping back into the workplace very quickly in terms of routines. How can we manage that so that we can effectively promote a hybrid model that means people can work at home and can work at the office and can choose to combine those two together? How do we negotiate that kind of challenge? Anyone want to start us off with that? And Paul, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. But first of all, I need to qualify a comment I made earlier on about the fact that HR don't look after their people. Or what I was meaning was, it's not solely HR that looks after our people. It's everyone in the organisation. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We're taking quite because of the new philosophy around about the 2/3 working in a remote or in a mobile way versus the 1/3. Siemens are taking quite a tough view on the new office of the future, where the idea of your own workspace. I mean, it's a transition, obviously, but the idea of your own desk, is going to be resigned to the past. I think we're already configuring our offices now to take account of a much reduced number of people coming into the office. Sadly, I think we all recognise that this kind of pandemic, it may not be the last time that the organisations need to take action, to protect the workforce And you know, the whole idea of social distancing, I think is probably here to stay to a degree. I think governments are being very cautious about what they say and how they view that. But my personal view and you know, listening to the experts, is that there is a strong likelihood that you know, there will be a need to at least be mindful of social distancing. You know, we've obviously, you know, like the rest of the country, not had any flu out. You know, there's not been a flu outbreak. Guess what? People are adopting social distancing, and so therefore our factories are not going to go back to. They're not going to go back to changing the layouts to not be socially distanced. So our office environments are going to change, and you know, so that in some respects that will be, I suppose, a top-down change that will be imposed on the workforce, because we just will not want to have as many people in the same locations as before the pandemic. So yeah, I think things are going to change, you know, in a way that insists that people or in a way that people you know, will want to embrace that change between the office time and the remote time.
Thanks, Paul. That's excellent. So we had a couple of questions come into the Q&A. So if I deal with those then at this point. So first of all, we had a question from Tom Hadley, which was changing the way people are managed is a big theme. Do we think this will also apply to better management of the whole workforce ecosystem, including temp, contract staff, freelancers, etc., as well as permanent employees? And what might this look like in practice? So does anyone want to have a go at responding to that one?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, 100%. So even as a small agency, I would not really before have considered how we start to work with anything other than disciplines outside of what we do. So obviously, you know, we don't do web and SEO, so we would work with those agencies, or creative design. Actually, what we've done in the last 12 months is work with more freelancers than ever before for a couple of reasons. One, it goes back to there is no them and us. There's no the office staff and the outsiders who potentially aren't there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Also, because it gives you a much better way to adapt as a business. So as I said, you know, the past 12 months for us have been some of our most successful against all odds. So being able to work with more freelancers and people who have even more experience, that has been incredible, and also helped us to grow in a more sustained way. And I think, you know, we've talked a lot today, and it's something I'm a real advocate of around mental health and how important that is. You know, Andy talked about Gen Z and what they want. Actually, what you look at is they want more flexible terms, they want a more flexible career path. You know, gone are the days when they're going to start at Rover at 16 and retire. You know, that is not the reality. However, what we also know is that some of those taboos around mental health, especially with that generation, have really been removed. So everyone is more open. So that mental health and wellbeing piece has to be put at the centre of your business. And I think this is the bit that will really benefit temporary staff, freelancers, anyone outside of that typical office environment, because I think before we made an assumption it was all done in appraisals and over the water cooler. So if you didn't have either of those things, you were missed. Whereas now we've got to have a more holistic approach. And, you know, I don't want to sound hippie-ish, but it's genuine. And I think for all the managers, and we know, you know, a couple of people have referred to the managers who are a bit skeptical about this new way of working. Okay, so for those managers, they have to see the commercial benefits. They have to see the performance-led benefits of having a team that's more flexible and happier. Then for everyone else, they've got to understand that this is not just a policy. It's not just a strategy for this year, like it's genuine. So, you know, as a business, we've talked about training. We, even as a business, have mental health first aiders. We offer for all of our team, including freelancers, including anyone, you know, even interns. Anyone can have access to free counselling through things like Able Futures and Living Well. That's available to everyone here and every business. And it's those benefits you've got to look at. And then as a business, you've got to start looking at, okay, how do we capture how people feel? You know, someone touched on resilience. I actually think what this period has taught us is that everyone needs to be really understanding of how they feel as well. And I'm not sure that's something lots of people have been conscious of. So how do you look at things like resilience training for the whole team that benefits them working with colleagues, but they understand themselves? And I think once you start to monitor things, you know, we've signed up something called Lumion, which is weekly quizzes to the team, just checking in on how they feel. And actually it's an anonymized report that then comes to the manager to say, okay, there are a couple of themes here and here are some suggestions for things you need to look at. I think those sorts of things should be accessible to everybody, be them temp, be them freelancers. You know, it's easy technology and easy conversations that no longer just have to be for the office staff. So I think there's a huge opportunity to make sure that we better manage the wider workforce 100%.
Thanks, Tara. That's brilliant. So, if I can ask a question that's been directed to Zoe, and Michelle might want to input on this one as well. So it says here, Zoe mentioned taking on 100 more staff. So I wondered how the panel sees staff recruitment changing, particularly the interview. Previously, face-to-face interview was a key stage in recruitment, looking into a candidate's eyes. Do they have a firm handshake, etc.? So over to you, Zoe and Michelle.
Yeah, so certainly for us, I would agree. In the past, face-to-face was a large part of it. We would precede that, you know, prior to the pandemic with phone calls and video initial stages to the interviewing process. I suppose we've just expanded that all stages now happen through phone calls and video calls. I think it's very unusual that we don't get on a video with somebody. You know, most people that we're talking to do have video capability. I would say it's an absolute minority where we don't have that opportunity, as opposed to still look them in the eye and see them face to face, albeit virtually. But I would agree. I think there is an element of some loss of not being able to meet somebody physically one-to-one. But what I would say is, I think the mechanisms that we've been using with the phones and the video interviews, we haven't seen any degradation in the quality of the candidates that we're recruiting. And in actual fact, we've seen really good pipeline of candidates coming through in Birmingham. So, you know, we've had great recruitment off the back of using those different techniques.
Thanks, Zoe. That's brilliant. And so, if I can direct the next question perhaps toward Andy, how do you feel flexibility works for a sales team with office open hours and customer-facing roles, such as account managers, that customers expect to be available during certain times?
It's quite weird. I was actually just typing the answer in the box there for you.
Oh, all right, okay. But there we are.
You know, when you look at this, it comes down to that trust element again. I mean, I see salespeople and account managers working flexible hours, and they always have done, to get a deal across the line. And it all comes down to that, having that relationship with your customers, because customers themselves no longer are actually 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And if you've got that kind of relationship that's open, you're having conversations at 6:30, 7 o'clock with them, because that's when they have the ability to chat for an hour. So I think it's the trust element, giving them the tools to do the job that allows them to connect, you know, video conferencing being one of them. And also diary management that comes down to it. But it all comes down to trust and actually that changing culture. So it's not just about 9 to 5, Monday to Friday anymore. Yeah,
I absolutely agree. I think that's it. I think the the reflection on job design is an important component of some of this kind of discussion around the future of work and how we see jobs being structured and what's expected in terms of an output. Yeah, moving away from a dependence on hours of work being the primary method of understanding someone's contribution. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists then, if I may, for their contributions this morning. And I know Emily wants to do a quick sum up before we finish, and if I can just do the same myself as a small mop up to the discussion this morning. So I think quite a lot of common themes have developed through the discussion this morning around some of the real positives that we've seen in the last year through experiences of remote working at home, or indeed some form of hybrid models, depending on organizations and depending, of course, at the time of year when we could see each other and when we haven't been able to so much. But there's certainly a number of common themes. I mean, what we've identified is the potential productivity benefits. We've identified the importance of thinking about job design and the way jobs are structured. We've certainly had a number of points made around the importance of thinking about employee well-being and how well-being feeds into all of these different dimensions of work, indeed in terms of the completion of tasks for a job, but also in terms of managing relationships, also in terms of nurturing talent, and in terms of thinking about how we manage flexibility in our workforces. I think it's fair to say that one of the things that is very evident is that not everyone can or wants to work at home, and so some of the discussion that's been raised in the last year from various different places has suggested that the future is everyone working at home. And I think what we're completely moving toward a path of is identifying that a combination of working at home with working at other locations, whether that's as Tara mentioned, people meeting up in coffee shops or in co-working spaces, whether that's meeting at an office environment or some other type of work location, meeting colleagues in a more industrial location, depending on the sector, at certain points. And whether that's coming together frequently or whether that's coming together more infrequently for kind of events and conferences and those kind of things, that will differ. One of the key things is definitely thinking about looking at your organization and looking at your workforce and thinking about what the needs of your organization are and what the needs of your workforce are. And there's definitely an element of co-creation in this, in terms of thinking about what the individuals need as well as what the organization needs. And I think that to leave it there, I will just shamelessly plug that at this time we're in the final stages of completing an edited book. So if you don't feel like all your questions have been answered this morning, folks who are attending, then do please follow the link I'll put in the chat shortly. Order a copy, order 10 copies, distribute them around your workforce. It can only help. But beside that shameless plug, if I can just thank all of our panelists again for the contributions this morning. It's excellent to see you all, and really good contributions, really insightful. And I'll hand back over to Emily from the chamber.
Thank you ever so much, Dan, and to all of our panelists. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So yeah, I just wanted to finish up by saying a huge thank you, of course, to our sponsors, including the University of Birmingham's Work Inclusivity Research Centre, BMET College and Aston University, but also a massive thank you to all of those of you who've spoken today: Dan, Tara, Paul, Andy, Zoe and Michelle. Your insights, like Dan has said, were absolutely invaluable, and I'm sure those watching it will agree with me. It was really, really interesting to hear from your different perspectives. What's obviously a very important topic that's going to decide what the future looks like for all of us. So as I mentioned at the start, this event is part of our Growth Through People campaign. We have a few, 7 events coming up Some of those are on the screen right now, including one with some of Dan's colleagues from the University of Birmingham Business Club and worked Inclusivity Research Centre on the 18th of March. That's on building back better workplaces, so incorporating some of today's themes as well as others. And actually from the Chamber, our Chief Strategy Officer, Henrietta Brilli, will also be on that panel. We also have the Growth Through People conference coming up on the 30th of March. We have some fantastic speakers. Keynote speakers will be Baroness Ruby Madreda-Smith and Jess Phillips. And like I said at the start, we've got a whole sort of schedule of panels and workshops as well. So I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, to register for the conference, which is free to attend for Chamber members, or I should say virtually attend, of course. And then finally, if you can spare 5 minutes to fill out the post-event survey and advise our policy work in this area, it would be massively appreciated. Thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us today, and I hope you had an informative session.